everybody. Trevor from Stevens Corporation. I got sent a request to answer some questions, and we're going to start with this one. Should I buy used, remanufactured, or new parts? Well, that depends on your situation, budget, and what's available for your car. If your car is more than 7 years old, the likelihood of you getting a brand new part from a dealership is probably non-existent, not going to happen. I've had problems with getting parts for vehicles that's 2 or 3 years old from a dealership. And so your other options are to go to some local parts stores. I'm not going to name any for sake of copyright stuff and that sort of thing. But you know the big brands I'm talking about. I'm talking about the parts stores that you drive by every day. For new parts, those generally are warranted. They're reliable for the most part, and they don't have any prior use. They've never been put on a vehicle before, as well as remanufactured parts. They've never been put on a vehicle or should not have been put on a vehicle before. I bought alternators, I bought AC compressors that were new right out of the box, and they didn't work. That goes for new parts, that goes for remanufactured parts. Most of your parts at the parts store, when it comes to alternators, starters, things like that, they're going to be remanufactured. And you can save a lot of money by buying remanufactured parts. Now, on some vehicles that the starter or alternator is really easy to get to, that might not be a big deal for you. But if it's one of those alternators that is extremely difficult to get to, you might want to get a new one. When I say new, I mean at the parts store you can get a new off-brand or OEM. OEM is original equipment manufacturer. So if it says OEM specs, then it's up to the same specs that GM or Ford or Dodge or whoever, Kia, Nissan, whatever make vehicle you got. It's up to the same specs that they originally had on the vehicle, supposedly. There's no way for you to know that. Me as an auto mechanic, there's really no way for me to test for that. So we just kind of have to believe what they tell us. But it's vital for you to remember that you need to look and see if they're going to warranty the parts that you're buying. For any of these situations that we've been talking about, alternators, starters, AC compressors, all that stuff, I would generally recommend to a client that you stay away from used parts. Because generally a used part, you don't know how many miles is on that particular part. Just remember, when you're buying a car, if you buy a car with 200,000 miles on it, but it has a rebuilt motor, well, that means that everything else on that car has 200,000 miles on it. We're talking shocks, we're talking the rear end, the transmission possibly, or the motor, depending on what the situation was. And all those things are going to wear out. I mean, if you're buying a used car, you need to look at all of this and take all this into consideration when buying a car. The cons of buying new parts is they're more expensive. If you go to a dealership, you're just going to spend more. You spend more if you go buy a new car or even a used car at a dealership than if you bought it from a secondhand dealer or if you bought it from an individual. You're going to spend way more if you go to a dealership or even some of these other places like that. The same goes for parts. You're going to spend more if you go to a dealership. So I would generally say that I would stay away from all dealership parts. They're just expensive and they're overpriced for your needs. You can get a good starter from a local, reputable parts store that will last you a very long time, in some cases outlast the car itself. So just keep that in consideration when you're thinking about buying parts. Remanufactured parts, let's hit on this a little bit. They usually come with a 6 to 36 month warranty. A lot of times, sometimes, they're tested and restored to near new condition. So let's just say you're working on a 85 Chevrolet truck. A remanufactured starter, there's nothing wrong with that. And in my opinion, you're going to have probably a better experience putting a remanufactured starter on a truck that old than you are with buying a new starter, for most cases. Again, it's all up to speculation. It all depends on the manufacturer that you get. They're generally cheaper than buying new parts. We've already discussed that. And depending on the manufacturer, reliability. That's the biggest thing. Is this going to leave you stranded? Recently, I was working on my wife's van, which is a 2012 Chrysler Town & Country. And it has a 3.8 liter motor in it. And we were discussing whether or not to buy a used aftermarket oil cooler. If you've had one of these cars and you've had an experience like we had with this, then you know what I'm talking about. You go out to start your car, you have no oil pressure, or maybe you walk out and you don't start the car and you realize, hey, why is there a bunch of oil on the ground? Generally, on those motors, they have a real bad tendency for the oil coolers to go bad. Now, these motors are found in Jeep Wranglers. These motors are found in Jeep Liberties. Any Chrysler product, for the most part. The Dodge Chargers had some of these motors in them, so it just depends. But they all got that same oil cooler. Now, I went on Amazon. You can find a lot of great stuff on Amazon, and some of Amazon's stuff is warranted. They may not be warranted through Amazon, but they're warranted through the manufacturer who made it. And again, it's a little bit of a hassle to deal with that, but it's a good way to get a cheap part. So we ordered an aftermarket oil cooler for it. And it's an all metal one. The original ones were plastic, and they leaked, they cracked eventually. The van's got 198,000 miles, something like that on it right now. So very high mileage vehicle. But, you know, we put a aftermarket oil cooler in it, and it's doing great. And it's all aluminum, so it was a part upgrade. And you're saying, Trevor, why would you upgrade on a minivan? Well, that's my wife's daily driver. I want my wife to be safe. I want my wife to be able to get from point A to point B where she's going and not have any issues. And so we went that route with that particular part. But now if we were putting an airbag in it, I don't know if I would trust an aftermarket airbag. It just depends on the manufacturer. Because, again, it's my wife driving the car, so I don't want her to be driving down the road and a faulty airbag deploy and potentially hurt whoever's in the vehicle. And so when it comes to safety products, that's another huge one. You can buy aftermarket airbags. You can buy airbags from junkyards in some cases. Some states don't allow that. But again, you're taking a gamble on something like that. But, you know, something I would buy for used parts is maybe some trim, body parts, windshield wiper arms, things that are not necessarily a high priority safety item. That's the things that I would be looking for. And also, if, you know, what's available. 2012 Chrysler Town & Country, dealerships aren't making parts for those anymore. However, you can go up a couple years and sometimes the parts will still fit. You can go back a couple years and sometimes the parts will still fit. So if you're looking at junkyards or something, another good resource that you can do if you're looking for used parts, and we'll get to this in a minute, is car-parts.com. You go in there, you type your zip code in, you type your make and model in, and it will give you a list of all the junkyards, relatively, if they're on this site, and most of them are, with used parts. So if you're one of those gearheads that's got an old truck or car or a hot rod or something that you're looking for a specific part, then used parts are probably your way to go when it comes to stuff like A-arms and things like that. I would recommend, if you're putting a used A-arm in, I would recommend that you get the A-arm and you change the ball joints and put remanufactured or new ball joints in. You can get new ball joints from Moog or whoever you want to use. from your local parts store. But that's what I would do, especially if it's some of these cars. Like my dad had a 1971 Crosser 300, and they don't make parts for those anymore. So sometimes you had to be resourceful and try to figure out what you can find. eBay is another great source to find old parts that are kind of hard to find. And if you need help finding parts, shoot me a message and I'll try to help you out any way that I can. So now we've landed on used parts. So they're usually the cheapest option, depending on what you're buying. Good for hard to find parts, as we've discussed. And, you're recycling. You're taking something that would have sat in the junkyard for years and you're reusing it. So that's a good thing. But you don't know the wear on it. You don't know the tolerances of it until you get it. And if you're ordering it from halfway across the country, like I've done in some cases, then you just don't know. There's usually very limited warranty, if any warranty at all. You usually have to pay the shipping back to the junkyard if you decide to ship it back, if they allow that. And you generally have a shorter lifespan, just because, again, you don't know how many miles is on this particular part, where it's set. If you buy body parts from up north, New England area, where there's a lot of salt and things like that, you're going to have problems with it. Rust is a huge factor there. On the contrary, if you buy parts from South Florida or even anywhere in Florida, you might have problems with rust just because of the sand and stuff like that. Depends on the part you get. So just be careful when you're buying parts. Remember, if the vehicle is 7 to 10 years old, you're probably not going to find parts at a dealership. Remanufactured is generally the middle road of where most people fall. If you buy parts from a parts store, that's what remanufactured is. You can buy new parts from a parts store, which are not the same name brand, so they're supposed to meet OEM specifications, but they don't always. And then used parts is probably my last resort if I'm really looking for something hard to find. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it helped. Have a great day.